Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 12 about the Georgia Constitution. It's Lesson 8 about Georgia legislation. In this lesson, you'll learn about the legislative session, about single subject legislation, about passing legislation, about the governor's veto, about the veto override, and about the line item veto. In this series of lessons about the Georgia Constitution, we're working through the Constitution one article at a time. In this lesson, we'll still be in the Article 3 about the legislative branch. Let me remind you that in Article 3, it says that the legislative power of the state will rest in the General Assembly, consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. That means that this is the body of the government of the state of Georgia that makes the laws. To understand better how the General Assembly goes about making laws, we're going to look at the legislative process in this lesson. Now, we got a lot to get through. These are 6 different subjects that we need to address in the lesson. Don't worry, the lesson isn't going to be gigantically long, even though we're covering 6 things. But because we're covering 6 things, we could accidentally lose track of where we're at and what we're talking about. So I've decided to color code the slides to make you better able to know what the subject is at any given moment. So let's begin by talking about the legislative session. Slides about it will have this reddish background. The Georgia General Assembly is a part-time legislature. Now, what we mean by that is that as opposed to the legislatures in some other states where it's a full-time job for the members of the legislature, they essentially meet year-round, they get paid a big salary to do so. Here in Georgia, the legislators only meet for a brief time and only get paid a limited amount of money for that. According to the state constitution, the General Assembly can meet no longer than 40 days each year. That's a very brief time to meet. Now, why would the Constitution limit the legislature to meeting such a short amount of time? Well, it limits the opportunities that the legislature has to either expand their power or to engage in corrupt practices of one sort or another. Remember, way back at the beginning of Georgia as a state, we had the Yazoo land scandal, in which the entire government of the state was caught in corruption. And since that time, Georgia has been very careful about trying to avoid that. And we see all kinds of examples of that in the Georgia Constitution. We've mentioned some previously. This is another example. With only a short amount of time to get their jobs done, the legislature really has to focus on getting the big important things done. They can't waste their time on small little things that just continually expand the power and role of government, nor can they waste time potentially on any sort of corrupt backroom deals. There just isn't enough time for that while they're trying to get the other stuff done. At least that's the notion of limiting the legislative session. All right, our next topic is single subject legislation, which will have this sort of orangish background, so you keep track of it. The Georgia General Assembly is restricted to single subject legislation. This is stated in the Georgia Constitution. No bill shall pass which refers to more than one subject. So what this simply means is what it says. Every bill has to be about a different topic. So you can't mix topics together. You can't have one bill about building roads that also includes things about vaccinations for the flu or something like that. You can't mix the topics. Now, why do that? Well, again, by doing this, it limits opportunities for corrupt bargaining. We saw this when we talked about the National Congress and discussed the concept of riders previously in this course. Maybe you remember what a rider is. A rider is something attached to a bill that has nothing to do with the rest of the bill. So, for example, you might want to get through some sort of regulation about, I don't know, let's say giving the legislature a raise, but you think, oh man, everyone's going to get upset about the legislature getting a raise. And so you attach it to some bill that everybody loves and wants. Like, for example, in the National Congress, maybe it would be a bill about paying our troops that kind of thing. So we've got a bill about giving all the troops a raise, and you slip something in there about giving Congress a raise too. So you attach a rider onto something in order to get it passed, because the people want the big thing and you hope they won't really notice the little thing. Well, you can't do that in Georgia. Each item that covers a different topic would need to have a different bill passed for it. And that way people see what each bill is really about, and they know what you're trying to do. And in this way, single subject legislation is designed to limit opportunities for corruption. All right, the next topic is how legislation actually gets passed by the legislature in the state of Georgia. The General Assembly passes bills by simple majority vote. In the state constitution, it says that in order for a bill to become a law, it has to receive a majority vote of all the members of each of the houses of the legislature. So it has to get a majority in the House of Representatives, and it has to get a majority in the state Senate. The next topic is the governor's veto with a screen background. Bills that are passed by the Georgia General Assembly are sent to the governor for the governor to sign or veto. The General Assembly passing a bill through both houses by a majority vote does not make the bill become a law. The governor has to sign it or have a chance to veto it first. According to the state constitution, the governor has 6 days to exercise his judgment about what to do if the legislature is in session. If he fails to act within those 6 days, then the bill automatically becomes a law. Now, if the legislature is not in session, he has 40 days to consider it. The truth is that with the legislature only meeting for 40 days, they end up voting on most things right at the end of their session and sending them to the governor as they adjourn. So usually the governor will have 40 days to consider a bill, not just 6. Now, please notice, though, as we describe what the governor can do here, that it says that if he fails to veto it within 6 days, it'll automatically become a law. That means that the governor of Georgia cannot pocket veto a bill. If during the session he sent a bill and he has it for 6 days and does not act, it'll automatically become a law. If the legislature is adjourned and he has 40 days to act on it, after those 40 days are up, if he has not signed it or vetoed it, it will automatically become a law. He cannot simply kill a bill by ignoring it. If he ignores it, it will become a law. All right, the next subject is the veto override. The Georgia General Assembly can override a governor's veto. So when the governor vetoes a bill, he hasn't killed it necessarily. Like with the President of the United States, the legislature can have another shot. But like with the President of the United States, they're not often going to be able to override the governor's veto. So what happens is, after the governor vetoes a bill, he sends it back to the house that it originated from, the House of the Georgia General Assembly. Then that house has a chance to vote on it, and if they can get a 2/3 vote to override the governor's veto, then they send it to the other house, and if they get a 2/3 vote there, then it becomes a law. So the veto override requires a 2/3 vote of both houses of the Georgia General Assembly. The last topic for this legislative process lesson is the line item veto. The Georgia governor can use a line item veto. This is a power that is fairly common for governors in the United States to have, but the President of the United States does not possess it. So it's not something that we've talked about previously in this course. What the Georgia Constitution says is that the governor may approve an appropriation and veto any other appropriation in the same bill. Now, what's being talked about here when they say appropriation is the legislature deciding where to spend money. This is a bill about spending money. So essentially what the governor can do is he can cross out different items that money is going to be spent on while leaving the others in place. And then when he signs the law, it signs in only those parts that he did not cross out. The parts that he has crossed out have been vetoed. Now, the legislature can still override those items that were crossed out and put them back in the law by a 2/3 vote, just like any other veto override. So bills about spending money have to have this opportunity, the governor with this opportunity to veto individual items in them. The purpose of the line item veto is to use it as another tool to avoid corruption. Now, it potentially avoids just overspending too. That's a major reason for it also. But one thing I want you to note about it is that it's a way to avoid corruption. Because what can happen in a legislature, as we noticed when we talked about the United States Congress engaging in what we called log rolling, members of the legislature can trade favors with each other to get their pet projects passed. Even though those projects may not be for the good of the entire state, they can help these individual legislators get elected. And they're doing it by spending the people's money on little things that are only for their self-interest rather than for the interest of the whole state. Well, the governor has a potential to undo those sorts of deals. He can look at them in a big bill that's passed. He can also undo riders, in effect, earmarks, things like that, by just simply saying, you know what? I don't think this money should be spent here. Yeah, maybe that's a deal that the legislators made with each other to get this law passed, but I don't buy it. I don't think that this is a good idea to spend this. I'm going to cross it out. What this means then is because the governor at any point can cross out the results of those backroom deals, there isn't as much incentive to engage in those backroom deals in the first place. At least that's the theory behind the line item veto. Now, there's all kinds of ways potentially around it, like getting the governor himself in on the deal. But at least the theory behind it is that the governor has a tool at his disposal to fight corruption within the legislature. All right, let's review what we learned in this lesson. First of all, how long does the Georgia legislature meet each year? Is it for 2 weeks? Is it for 40 days? Is it for 6 months? Or is it year-round? The Georgia legislature meets for just 40 working days each year. What subject matter restriction is on bills that are passed by the Georgia legislature? May they not address military issues? Must they only address one subject at a time? Must the subjects for the bills be chosen by the governor? Or are there no restrictions on the subject matter? Bills passed by the state legislature must only address one topic. You can't have multiple things in one bill. What vote of the General Assembly is needed to pass a bill? Is it a majority vote of just the House? A majority vote of just the Senate? Is it a majority vote of either of the houses? Or is it a majority vote of both houses of the state legislature? A majority vote of both houses of the state legislature is required to pass a bill in the state of Georgia. What happens if the governor does not sign or veto a bill? Is that then a pocket veto? Or does the bill then become a law? Is the bill returned to the House, or is it returned to the Senate? If the governor declines to either sign or veto a bill, once the clock is run out, either 6 days during the legislative session or 40 days afterwards, then the bill automatically becomes a law. What vote of the legislature is needed to override a veto? Is it a majority vote of both houses? Is it a 2/3 vote of both houses? Is it a 3/4 vote of both houses? Or is it a 3/5 vote of both houses? A legislative override of the governor's veto requires a 2/3 vote of both houses. What kind of bills may a line item veto be used on? On taxing bills, on criminal law bills, on spending bills, or on election regulation bills? The line item veto may be used on spending bills. The governor, in effect, can cross out spending items on certain things while signing the rest of the bill into law. All right, that completes this lesson. The next lesson will also be from Unit 12. It will be Lesson 9 about the legislative powers of the state of Georgia.